Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Code. Today I'm joined by Jake Chervinsky, who I will not tell you anything about because you're going to find all about it from him in a moment. Welcome to Beyond the Code, the podcast where industry experts and brilliant legal minds discuss the impact of new emerging technologies. I'm your host, Yitzy, a lawyer and tech enthusiast. Join us as we explore the legal, regulatory, and ethical issues surrounding AI, blockchain, and more. Get ready to go beyond the code and stay ahead of the game. Okay, cool. So who's Jake Chervinsky?
Well, I guess I'll start by saying I'm a crypto lawyer. That's how most people know me. I wanted to be a lawyer basically my whole life, and I always viewed it as an opportunity to really make change in the world. And I think that's how I ended up getting into crypto. Maybe we'll get there as we get further into the conversation. But honestly, I think of myself in many ways as a technologist. I want to contribute to the advancement of human civilization. I think the most important way to do that is through the advancement of technology. And as a lawyer, I've found over the course of my career that often laws and regulations get in the way of technological innovation rather than enabling it. And so I really wanted to sort of commit my career to making sure that people have, an opportunity, especially developers, to build what they want to build and improve the world in that way. So I guess that's how I ended up talking.
That was like a very mature take on laws and regulations. And you said you've always wanted to be a lawyer. I'm curious, like, at what age did you have that train of thought that like, oh, laws and regulations are like hampering innovation? I want to come in and like just make them all that much smoother. Like, I just can't imagine as like a 7 or 8 year old that was like unless you're just way smarter than I am. Because I also always wanted to be a lawyer, but for different reasons. I was just like, reading John Grisham books. I'm like, these guys sound like rich and badassy. I want
Nice. Yeah. No, my origin story is closer to yours than having grand thoughts about laws and regulations. That came a lot later. Probably when I was a lawyer is when I started seeing it that way. I decided really that I wanted to be a lawyer in high school when I did mock trial, and just sort of fell in love with trial advocacy and the experience of being in a courtroom, even a fake courtroom, giving arguments and doing direct and cross examinations, making objections, learning the rules of evidence. All that just really spoke to me. I think I tend to be a very analytical person, and the process of being in a courtroom, putting together a case, even long before being in the courtroom, thinking through the arguments and a case theory and how to be persuasive and trying to get to the truth of some issue through this very rules bound, but also very creative type of activity. I just loved it. I'm also a very competitive person, and so the world of high school, and then I ended up doing college and law school, mock trial, and also moot court. Extremely competitive. A lot of really crazy people do this kind of stuff, somewhat similar to other speech and debate activities. And so truly, I went to college knowing that I wanted to do mock trial and go to law school. I went to law school feeling that I wanted to be a trial lawyer. And then sort of one thing led to another, and that's not really where my career took me, but obviously career paths tend to, twist and turn.
So where did your career path take you?
Yeah, so I went to the George Washington.
End up becoming a lawyer.
I did become a lawyer, and I did become a litigator. I went to George Washington University Law School, and out of law school went to a large law firm called Baker McKenzie, one of the largest by number of lawyers in the world. And I don't say that necessarily as a credit to the firm, but more just as a description of what the sort of corporate culture is like. Really big place, really big cases and big matters. And really what happened for me was I went to law school wanting to be in court in trial. But as you may know, and probably a lot of listeners of the podcast may know about the legal industry, big law firms tend not to go to trial very often. And yet those are the most coveted jobs, the ones where as a young lawyer, you tend to get the best training and also the best experience and opportunities, not necessarily a place that you're going to stay for your entire career, but a really great place to go right out of law school. So coming out of law school, I went to a big firm where I felt I could do the thing that was closest to trial work as possible, which was a combination of commercial litigation, government enforcement defense, and regulatory compliance and investigations. And that this is probably where I started to have sort of deeper thoughts about what is the legal system, in what ways does it work well, and does it work poorly in the context of large companies, and especially those pursuing technological innovation. Before that, just to round out the story, I had worked during law school and college in the public defense world. I really felt very strongly that there was something rotten in the criminal justice system in the United States. I think this is still very true. And in particular, around the disparate outcomes that people have based on their socioeconomic status or the color of their skin or, where they live. And especially in Washington, D.C., this was something that I experienced being a student at George Washington University, where, people were getting away with all kinds of stuff in Northwest D.C., whereas if you were in Southeast D.C. and you didn't look like me, for the same kind of thing, the police would come and kick your door down and put you in jail and really try to take your life and liberty away. And I just found that to be totally despicable as an American who believed very deeply in concepts of justice and equity and making sure that people are treated fairly and have an opportunity to succeed in life. So I sort of tried in many ways to apply that same principle to my work at a big law firm by sort of fighting the government in the same way or a similar kind of way, just in white collar crime as opposed to in street crime. And, I won't just keep rambling on at you. I learned a huge
Ramble
amount.
away.
But yeah, that ended up not sort of being where I decided to hang my hat for the rest of my career.
Okay, so then what happened? It's like you got to Baker McKenzie and you ended up, you know, getting a slap in the face, realizing this is not what you thought it was going to be, and then migrated into a different practice area.
Yeah, something like that. So I, went to a big firm feeling like, okay, litigation, really good practice, white collar criminal defense. We'll go fight the government. And I will say I learned a huge amount, and I have a huge amount of respect for the firm, and
So,
enjoyed my time
sorry to
there.
interrupt. White collar criminal defense is fighting the government, or it's helping people launder money.
Well, it's definitely not helping people launder money, although sometimes it
Uh,
might be defending people accused of laundering money, and hopefully they did not actually do that. But yeah, no, I mean, white collar criminal defense really just means
I'd say it's
investigations.
really just a matter of framing. Like you frame it as like white collar crime is like, fighting the bad government. It's not always like that. Like you often have white collar criminals that are criminals and they need a defense just like anybody else.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. Yeah, I really what I mean is the government is on the other side of those cases,
yeah,
right? So you're,
but I've
whether you're
never
a
seen it from that like same altruistic outpoint that you're looking at it from now or then, rather.
yeah, well, you make a great point that it's not like there's a category which is white collar criminal crime or white collar criminal defense and then everything else. It's really all just defense against criminal prosecution, and white collar tends to describe investigations of financial crime, right, or other crime where there aren't, there isn't violence or drugs or something like that involved. But the truth is that white collar defense applies anytime the government is coming after a corporation. And I think in many ways, the work that I've done in crypto defending companies, against investigations by the
Don't
SEC,
spoil it.
like
We haven't
very
got
similar.
there. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah.
But yes, I
But
agree with you on
so,
that point.
yeah. So look, really awesome experience, but I guess where I sort of landed, and funny enough, I've sort of come full circle on this, was that most of my work was regulatory compliance, not so much real enforcement defense. You don't go to trial on these types of cases, right?
Mhm.
In fact, in most cases, to your point, by the way, there is some wrongdoing that has been discovered, and often in the context of a large corporation, it's like some employee who did something wrong and the company finds out about it and the company itself reports it to the government, fires the employee, and then tries to figure out how to mitigate whatever harm was done and work out a settlement with the government. In that sense, it's really not fighting with the government. It's working with the government to, try to redress whatever harm occurred. And I enjoyed that work to some degree, but I also found it somewhat unsatisfying and unfulfilling. I didn't really feel like I was doing justice necessarily, right? Pushing back against overzealous prosecutors or a government that was improperly targeting, the people they were trying to prosecute. And I also wasn't in court, and I really wanted to get back in court. So what happened was, after a couple of years, I applied for federal clerkships, and I ended up clerking for a federal district judge. So that's in the trial court in Los Angeles, the Central District of California. And, clerkships are one of these things that lawyers do early in their career. Amazing experience working for a judge, drafting judicial opinions, managing trials from the side of chambers, and also something that opens up a lot of doors for future opportunities. And I felt like I really wanted to be a litigator. This was an experience that I needed to have. So I went and clerked for a year.
Is it
It was
common in the States to like pick yourself up and go all the way from like the East Coast to the West Coast for like a job?
For jobs, generally not. For clerkships, yes.
Okay,
And it's so competitive getting a clerkship that what
really?
ends up happening, especially for someone at a law school like mine. So George Washington, it's like not a top 10 law school. It's a very good law school. But if you go to Yale or Stanford or Harvard, right, you have a much better chance of getting a clerkship, and you maybe have, to some degree, your choice of where you want to be, especially on the district court level. When you're a couple years out of law school, especially, and your credentials are like a top 30 law school and a top 50 law firm, not like a top 5 and top 5, you take what you can get. And so I applied very broadly around the country in cities where I felt like my wife and I could survive for a year, and then decide what to do after that.
It doesn't like the fact that you worked in Baker McKenzie doesn't trump your, second tier law degree.
I mean, it was definitely good. The number of students that go to a big firm
Sorry
like
to
that.
push you on this. It just I find it really upsetting, the whole system. Like it's not really that different here in Israel. Um, but it's unfortunate that like wherever you go to university at the age of like 18 or 19, like basically puts you on a track for the rest of your life. And it's not necessarily because you got the best education there, just because like it's perceived to be better than wherever else it is that you um were able to get in or were able to afford.
Yeah, I we could spend the rest of this whole
Yeah, I know,
podcast talking about how,
I
like,
mean to go off on a tangent. It's just like,
no, I'm totally with you. And to me, and as we get through sort of how I ended up leaving this world and going into crypto, very much my impression was this is an environment of credentialism and prestige that
mhm.
does not reflect the actual quality of the work that people are doing. But that wasn't where I was when I
Yeah.
was 25 or
Okay,
26, right? I
keep going.
just yeah.
So you moved
And
off to the West Coast.
so yeah, I went to LA and had a good time in LA for a year, but worked very, very hard. A lot of people do clerkships where it's sort of like a break from working hard at a big law firm, and that's just not how my judge was. My judge was a very studious and hardworking person himself, and he expected a lot of diligence and zeal from his clerks. So I worked myself to the bone, learned a huge amount, and then after clerking, did decide, as I had planned, to go to a litigation boutique. And I actually applied to a bunch of different places around the country, but had so fallen in love with DC that I really just wanted to come back. And that's where I am now and have been since back then. Ended up getting a job as an associate at a boutique called Cobre and Kim. It's a somewhat small firm, although
Familiar.
offices around the country,
Hmm.
very much focused on trial practice, exclusively disputes and investigations, almost all involving international fraud and misconduct in some form or another. And like that felt to me like a really great place to land. Also, around the same time, I had started to develop a personal passion for crypto, totally aside from my work life. And
What
I can
year is
tell you,
this?
uh, well, funny enough, I first heard about Bitcoin in 2013 and totally didn't get it. So I'll tell you the miss. We've all got a story, right, of how we should have bought
How do you
a ton
faded
of Bitcoin
Bitcoin?
and didn't.
Yeah.
So in 2013, I was an associate, a junior associate at Baker McKenzie. And like I said, I was doing a lot of regulatory compliance, and some of that was anti-money laundering compliance for large financial institutions. And one thing I did for one of my clients was to write a monthly update on all developments in the anti-money laundering space. And there was one day that FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, put out their first ever guidance on convertible virtual currency. Like, what does money transmission mean in the context of Bitcoin? I'd never heard of Bitcoin before. So I researched Bitcoin for like half an hour, just enough to write the 2-paragraph blurb to my client. Here's what FinCEN just did. Promptly, totally forgot about Bitcoin. I was like, this is not a real thing. This is some fake internet
It's a
money.
line
This
item
is
in this weekly summary.
exactly. And didn't come across it again for about 4 years, till 2017, when I was applying for jobs right after my clerkship, and I was just sort of hanging out, trying to figure out where I was going to go next, and I saw a headline: Bitcoin had reached a new all-time high, and I was like, "Oh, this is still a thing! I can't believe it!" And that's where I started doing the actual research and learning, again from a technology perspective, just how world changing I thought that was going to be.
Wow. Okay. And what did you do with that information?
Initially, I did what everyone else did, which is I bought a bunch of coins and traded them and felt like a total genius because I did really well in
Or you
2017 and
thought you
then
did really well?
I thought I did really well. And if I had been smart, like most people are not the first time they go through this, I would have kept some of those profits, which I did not do. So in 2018, gave it all back to the market as most people did. But honestly, just thought it was going to be a personal hobby, passion thing I was interested in. Then at Cobra and Kim, given the nature of the work that the firm was doing, right? Disputes and investigations related to international fraud and misconduct, ICOs became a pretty big part of my practice. And I actually identified at the firm that I thought there was going to be a significant increase in enforcement because of all the fraud that we saw with ICOs and the lack of regulation, and the seemingly obvious way in which ICOs were unlawful, unregistered securities
Yeah.
issuances under US law. And the firm was very entrepreneurial. They encouraged all of the lawyers at the firm to have a business plan. And so I said to them, crypto is the next thing. We should be building a practice in this industry. And the firm was sort of hot and cold on it, uh, understood that there was an opportunity there, but the opportunity hadn't manifested yet, right? There weren't really big matters at that time. And meanwhile, the firm was doing exceptional work in financial services and defending others who were accused of market manipulation and any number of different types of business lines and products that were already very profitable. So they were only so interested in me launching my own crypto practice as an associate who probably should have been billing hours to the big cases that the partners had brought in, right? Um, so I said to them, well, look, let me just start talking to these people in this industry and start making connections. And I said to them, the place this happens is on Twitter. So I want to start tweeting about crypto. And the firm was not a very big fan of this idea, right? This is at a time, this is probably still true, when firms generally, I think the whole corporate world, very skeptical of social media, right? It was like, this is not real. This isn't the real world. This isn't where you communicate with credible people. And that was obviously not true in crypto. The entire industry was on crypto Twitter at the
Yeah.
time. And what I saw was many of them, builders in the space, investors, traders, were asking questions that only lawyers could answer. But there were no lawyers on Twitter who were willing to give them answers, right? What lawyer is crazy enough to start, talking about legal issues on Twitter? So I was like, I'm just going to start doing this. And my firm was like, no, I think what you should do is just write blog posts. And when you write a blog post, you should just tweet it out. That's the best use of Twitter, to just as a distribution channel. And that was obviously not true, because if you only tweet once a month when you've written a blog post, no one's going to see it. So
If you're
I just started.
tweeting from your own personal account, like you needed firm approval for that?
So great question. So I decided I did not need firm approval, and I decided to just start tweeting from my own account.
Okay.
And I had all the right disclaimers in my profile. And I figured this is no problem. This is just me sort of outside of my work hours doing what I'm interested in doing. That worked until the firm discovered my Twitter account, because I wrote a thread about the Bitcoin ETF. And this was at the time when people were
This
wondering,
is like
when is the
super
Bitcoin ETL?
premature. No,
It
like
was really early, right? And everyone was
yeah,
like, "Oh, when's it going to get approved?" And it was like, this is not going to get approved. Let me explain to people what the timeline is and what the SEC is likely to do. And unbeknownst to me, the thread went viral. And overnight, I went from having like 200 followers to 3,000 followers. And the tweet thread was picked up by Coindesk and a bunch of other media outlets. And all of a sudden, it was on my firm's radar, and they were somewhat displeased. Um, but I sort of
no press is all press is good press. No, like
that was my
it's
take.
and also like this is like a an intelligent legal analysis of something that's like very relevant in the market. It's being picked up by all the relevant media in the industry. Like, why is that a bad thing?
No one could tell me anything that I had tweeted was wrong as a matter of fact or law.
Just the fact that it was on Twitter.
It was just that it was there and it was seemingly pro crypto. And at the time, the firm didn't want to take a pro crypto stance when so many of their clients were financial institutions that had mixed feelings about crypto, right? This
Okay.
was a very different time, 7 years ago, when crypto was really very disreputable. It still is to some degree, but much less so than it was then. And also, the firm said, what client are we going to get from you tweeting this kind of thing, right? We're not going to be
We're not going to want to
lawyers for
represent
ETF
these like
sponsors.
degens, right?
Exactly. And we're traders or what have you. Although the firm did do a lot of work in market manipulation, which was one of the things I said to them. Hey, there's going to be prosecutions of traders in crypto, just like there are in, precious metals and etc. But really what I think it was, and I don't want to just bash the firm because, phenomenal firm, and they were doing, I think, what was right for them, for their business model, which was just different from what I wanted to do for myself and for my personal practice. Right? My goal was to build a network within the industry, both because I loved it and I just, for me, this was fun. It was like I tweeted something and some person I had followed for a year and thought was really brilliant was suddenly in my DMs wanting to talk to me. Like I felt like I was part of something that made sense to me, but also because I figured the best way to do business development, and I think this is still true, this is advice I give to young lawyers who ask me about this, is to just show that you're good. Just do work for free and put it out there and stand by it and talk to people. And you might get something wrong. And most lawyers are terrified of getting anything wrong in public. But that's how the world works. It's okay to be wrong, and people will not hold it against you, right? So that was sort of my personal approach. And this sort of gets to my decision to leave the firm, um, which was I really felt that even at this boutique, which prided itself on its entrepreneurial spirit, and I do think that it does have that in context in relation to other law firms, even in that context, I felt like there are these expectations of lawyers to act a certain way, to be a certain way, to, adhere to these certain very traditional, very conservative, very risk averse principles of how to do business. And the crypto world was the exact opposite of that. And I just loved it, right? Crypto was like, it doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter what you've done before. It doesn't even matter if people know your name. In fact, maybe it's better if they don't know who you really are. What matters is, are you doing good work? And are you smart? And do you have something to add? And I just felt like that was so much more true to my personality and how I wanted to show up in the workplace, but also in the world, that I couldn't resist going full time into crypto.
So where'd you go?
So I ended up general counsel at Compound Labs. The
Okay.
way this happened is sort of funny, and I think about it now that I'm in venture capital on sort of the other side of this. What happened was I was tweeting, and I had gone, from the 3,000 followers now up to like 20 something thousand, and I was starting to become a sort of known commodity in the space, going to conferences and going on podcasts and things like that. And I got a message from a venture capitalist who wanted to talk. And I had this like 15-minute conversation with him. And really what he wanted to know was, do I want to leave my firm and go in house to crypto? And I was like, sure, I'm interested. And he said, okay, I'm going to introduce you to my entire portfolio. So he sent out my resume to the entire portfolio. And Compound Labs was one of the portfolio companies. And I ended up having a conversation with Robert Leschner, the founder there, and also Jeff Hayes, the CTO co founder. And it was just like everything that I had wanted in crypto, where it was like just a great conversation. It wasn't like, where did you go to, law school, and, what was the prestige
Yeah,
of the
it's
district
exactly what
court
you
where you
said about
clerked?
like caring about what it is that you're building and not so much like what your credentials are.
Exactly. It was like, what is DeFi and how do we make it make sense in the law? And how would you go about, building the product and, doing the work that we want to do? And truly, we had only two conversations for about 2 hours total before it was like, okay, I want to do this. Like, what's your process? And they were like, there's no process. We want to do this too. Like, we'll send you an offer letter tomorrow. So once I found the right place and it just felt right, it happened very fast. So left the big law world, the sort of very traditional DC, New York corporate white shoe culture, and started working for a crypto startup with its headquarters in the Mission District in San Francisco, in like an old warehouse, brick walls. Very typical first day for me. I went to the office and I thought I was dressing down. I was wearing a blazer and I think I wore slacks. I'm not even sure I wore
And they're like,
jeans, but I was like,
dude,
I'm not in a suit,
t-shirts.
isn't? Yeah. Um, and of course, everyone laughed at me immediately, and it was like, this is the last time I'm ever going to do this. So, ended up spending about 2.5 years at Compound, and truly an amazing experience for me in every way. And I don't even know really how to boil it down, but um, I guess I would say working with engineers was eye opening for me. I love working with people who are trying to build things. And that was one of the sort of driving forces for me leaving the world of litigation to go into the world of, uh, an in-house role in an industry as general counsel, where I was also doing the work of a product counsel, for example, which was like, let me help these people put something into the world that matters, as opposed to just trying to clean up the mess of the people who tried to do this before and got it
Right.
wrong.
And that's compliant as well. Like we always tell our clients like that we kind of trying to come in, learn your product, and then there's a lot of like architectural work that goes on like from our side from with like a compliance and legal outlook to it together with the legal work. Because like if you're not building something with that in mind, then you're not definitely necessarily going in the direction you want to be going in, and you're gonna just hit a brick wall and have to go backwards.
I couldn't agree more. And I tell my current portfolio companies this all the time. Get lawyers involved way before you think you need lawyers involved. And a lot of people don't like that, right? The engineers who have had bad experiences with lawyers, who are just, red tape, bureaucratic, saying no to them all the time. Their preference often is, let me just build the product and then I'll like show it to legal before we launch it. And the problem is you can do so much work on a product that from day one you've designed in a way that cannot be compliant, that if you had just talked to a lawyer, they could have helped you out and
Yeah,
saved you all
tweak
that
it
time.
like this, and you don't need a license to run it.
Exactly. And often lawyers are additive in this way, right? Like the lawyer might have an idea from a commercial perspective, how to make it even better, that the engineer wouldn't have thought of, because it's just a different way of thinking about the
Yeah.
world. And so like I loved that so much. And without getting all the way into the weeds of the work that I did at Compound, when I went there, the total volume locked in the Compound protocol was about $10 million. Like DeFi was barely a thing. You could literally count on your two hands how many mainstream's not even the right word, right? But like known active DeFi protocols there were. Everyone knew each other. That's how small the world was. And fast forward to when I left, I think the TVL was something like a billion or more. We, in the meantime, designed and distributed the Compound governance token, which was a process that I led. We decentralized the protocol, which was both a regulatory compliance strategy, but also like the heart of DeFi, right? And something that really addressed um, the issues that I had seen in the financial system as a regulatory compliance lawyer, where it was like these large institutions taking advantage of their own customers and sort of like extracting value from them in a way that was not contributing value in general to the system. And here's DeFi, the point of which is to disintermediate those institutions. So I was really proud of doing that work. And, it made me feel like going back to private practice, it'd be really hard after having that kind of experience.
Sure, for sure. Like after leaving Big Law, I can never go back to having somebody else like dictate what my day is gonna. Whatever. I guess that's for you. Still not working for yourself. It's the same. It's kind of the same thing, but I don't know. Just like Big Law is not a place that breeds creativity and entrepreneurship in the legal sphere, as opposed to like going when you went, at the beginning of DeFi, let's call it, where everything that people are doing today is basically just like, tweaking what you did before. But being there as like a pioneer, that must have been an insane experience.
It really is different. And, this isn't to say there aren't good lawyers at big firms. Of course, there are doing great work,
You
but
didn't have
it's just,
templates. Like if you were at a big firm and you were doing this, it wouldn't be like, okay, who did this that we could, at another firm or in another deal that we could just kind of like take and build off of that. Like this was like really like inventing something from scratch.
it's just a different business, right? Like big firms are in the business of law. And that's great and important. And my portfolio companies and us, at Variant, my firm, we use all kinds of firms for all kinds of things. But it just didn't at the time touch my soul in the way that working with
I love how
engineers.
you've made it spiritual at this point.
I'm no, really, I think it is like what is the point of this time that we're spending, right? Is it to increase your profits per partner at your law firm, or is it to help create something new in the world that might not exist if not for your help and guidance? And especially as lawyers, right, we're not principals, we're agents for principals. And having a real relationship with a principal, not to say you can't do that as outside counsel, but like when you've got a roster of clients, it's just different than when you can really get down deep into the weeds and be part of the team that's building something. Yeah, I find it hard to imagine, at least going back to a big firm. I think that's probably in my past.
Yeah. So what happened next?
So
So you're at
Compound,
Compound for 2.5 years.
amazing experience, but also part of the way that most DeFi projects work, or at least the way that we were conceiving of them back then, was that you sort of finish the work, right? You build a protocol, you get it to a point where it can be maintained and upgraded by a decentralized group of token holders, or some other form of decentralized governance. Then you move on to other products and services built around the protocol, or some other type of protocol. And I felt like that moment for Compound was a good moment for me to explore other opportunities. And around that same time, so this is the summer of 2021, I started getting very involved in policy in Washington. So, for anyone who was around back then, they
How
may
are you doing
remember.
that from San Fran?
So I was actually still in DC and I was working remotely for Compound. So I
Okay.
flew out to SF like 1 week a month for the time that I was
Okay.
at Compound until COVID hit. And then, obviously we were all remote. But also, Compound, when I was there, joined the Blockchain Association, which is the crypto industry's main trade group in DC. And I was, one of the earliest members. And because I was in DC and, understood and cared a lot about policy just because of how important it was for DeFi, I was very active with the Blockchain Association. And this led to the dispute over the bipartisan infrastructure bill in the summer of 2021. So to boil this way down for folks who weren't around during that time, the infrastructure bill was what it sounds like. The government wanted to build roads and bridges and all kinds of other stuff, right? This was a key priority for the Biden administration. The thing is, to spend all of the money that it required to build all that infrastructure, Congress needed to find what they call pay for provisions. So, some way to raise revenue in the bill to offset new spending for infrastructure. One of the ways they did this was by
Find money that
basically,
they didn't have, basically.
yes, exactly. And one of the ways that they tried to raise money that they didn't otherwise have was by increasing tax compliance in their eyes on crypto. And they wanted to do this basically by saying all DeFi platforms, so providers of non-custodial front ends and other people working in DeFi, are now brokers under the tax code and have to do KYC of all users so that the IRS can make
The
sure that
assumption
no
being
one is
they would
evading
capture
taxes.
all kinds of taxes that perhaps hadn't been paid or
That's what they thought, and they had math that they would not show us about how much tax evasion there was in crypto, and we were like, we don't think there's that much tax evasion in
right.
crypto actually,
Also,
and
just because you
they
can't see it doesn't mean that it's there.
Yeah, I don't know, man. But what ended up happening was I spent like a month just working on this issue, and I told Robert at Compound, like, I think this is a priority. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this, and he totally understood and was totally supportive of me doing that. And I just fell in love with doing policy work. And
Right. So
so
when you said
after
that you were like spending time on it, like what were you doing practically? Like, what is it? Is it like meeting with members of Congress and arguing with them? Like, what is it? What does like shaping policy actually look like? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
familiar with the adage, but not like what it actually looks like.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So yes, short answer, it's talking to the policymakers, right? Nothing happens if you don't talk to the policymakers. So at the time, I was joining calls with the Blockchain Association and many other people who are engaged on this as well to explain to the policymakers, you are killing DeFi in the name of raising tax revenue that you're not actually going to raise. This is a mistake. We need to limit the scope of this provision. So some of it is talking to the policymakers. A huge amount of it, though, is coalition building within the industry. So, if the industry doesn't speak with one voice, the policymakers don't listen. So you have to make sure everyone in the industry, to the extent
As
possible,
like
is
a
on the
uniform
same
approach.
page. Yeah.
So is that
So,
what
and
the
that,
association does? Like it basically aggregates like the voices of everybody in DeFi or in blockchain and says like Jake is going to be our spokesperson and he's going to speak on behalf of all of us,
exactly.
like a
And
lobby.
that's Yes, it is. And that this was the crypto lobby in its earliest days back
Mhm.
in 2021. The Blockchain Association was founded in late 2018. Before that, there were some other organizations, but not a well-developed or mature lobby at all. And this really was the formative moment where crypto decided, oh, what Congress does really matters because without us knowing, Congress could ban DeFi, and we need to be much more engaged in order to make sure that this moves in the right direction. And because Congress isn't going to talk to 200 different companies to get all of their different opinions, trade associations are really important to do that work of getting everyone, on the same page and boiling down feedback and getting it to the policymakers. So what ended up happening was after the infrastructure bill passed, I was talking to the CEO. Then she was the executive director of the Blockchain Association, Kristen Smith. And she was like, it was so helpful that we had a lawyer, you
I was going to
involved
say
in
like
all of
how did you
this.
become the mouthpiece? Like you basically like there was nobody else, so it's like all right, I'm here. I might as well be the guy.
Kind of, and I don't want to take credit for all the work on the infrastructure bill. There were many people who were very vocal about this, but
And
I
yet,
think but yeah, and like in part because I was such an early member and because I had a Twitter following and I was sort of like live tweeting what was going on behind the scenes for a crypto community that at the time did not really understand how politics worked, I sort of became viewed as person worth listening to, I guess, on policy issues. And so, Kristen was like, it was really great having a lawyer. I think we should hire a full-time lawyer. Do you know anyone? And I was like, yeah, I do.
hmm.
That's me. So I ended up going to the Blockchain Association as their chief policy officer. So in a way, stepping back from the practice of law and focusing full time on working on policy. And I was there for about 2 years.
How
Um,
is the association funded? Is it like donation based, or is there, are the members have to pay like a membership fee?
yeah, membership dues, entirely
Okay.
funded by membership dues. And when I
And what
joined,
benefits do you get being a member? Just like your ability to be vocal?
so a few things. First of all, you get all the benefits the association offers. So there's, monthly calls, working groups that you get to participate in. If you come to DC, the association can take you to the Hill or set meetings for you. You do get your voice heard by the association, so they get to factor in your views when they give their own feedback. Long list of benefits, and at a much less
Who can
cost.
join? Yeah, do you have to be American?
So it depends on the association. For the Blockchain Association, you do have to be a US based company that is predominantly focused on crypto. So, like TradFi institutions do not join the Blockchain Association, and non US companies that have no presence in the United States are not eligible to join. But there's other trade associations with different rules.
Cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah.
cut you off. Carry on.
No, no, not at all. And what I was saying though about the association is in many ways it's a less expensive way to get involved in policy rather than setting up a full in-house policy department, right? Like by the time you're hiring your own full-time lobbyist, you're spending probably 2 or 3 times what it costs to get a membership at a trade association. And when you're a member of a trade, you also get this benefit of working with so many other companies that are also members and getting that flow of information. So it's in many ways the sort of first step for a lot of companies that want to get involved in policy.
And would you say that like the trade has a stronger voice than the individual lobbies because like they represent so many voices, or not necessarily?
Yes and no. I do think that a well-run trade association with a strong membership has the single strongest voice of any one entity in any given policy issue
Hmm.
because they speak with the voice of the full membership. The uh, the sort of counter argument to this is trade associations are nonprofits. So when you mention how they're funded by membership dues. That gets them pretty far, but it doesn't begin to compete with some of the individual companies that can put tens of millions of dollars
Without
behind
even
their
flinching.
own.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it does end up being sort of like the trade association and then the few very large, very well funded voices in the room that are most influential on these kinds of issues.
Very cool.
Yeah. But so my job there was head of policy, chief policy officer. And so it was really my job to understand what is the policy that the government is trying to put forward, whether that's the SEC's perspective on the Howey test or some new bill that's coming in Congress, to then interpret that for the membership and explain it to them because, they're not going to spend a week reading 1,000-page bill or something like that, and then get their feedback and then figure out what is the industry strategy to try to solve this problem or achieve some type of policy goal.
Would you give
And
recommendations as well? Like, I'm assuming that since you're the guy with his finger on the pulse, you would like give these summaries and say like, I suggest doing A, B, and C.
totally. Yeah,
Okay.
it's funny. In a way, it's not that different from being outside counsel. And this is sort of a through line throughout my career. Every time I try to stop being everyone's lawyer, I end up being sort of a pseudo
Right back
version
where you
of
started.
everyone's lawyer. Yeah. Because you have this membership. The membership is not unlike having a roster of clients. And you see some development, you interpret it, you explain it to the members, you make a recommendation on strategy, but ultimately the members are the ones paying your salary. So if they don't like what you're suggesting, you don't get to just go do whatever you want, right? You're responsive to those people who you are acting as an agent for. And so that's what I did for about 2 years when I was at the Blockchain Association.
Carry on.
So
No, I
yeah,
know that. I
so
know that at some point during that time, you also started the DeFi education fund.
yes, it was actually
Because I
right
had on
around.
Amanda Tuminelli like a year or so ago, and I
Awesome.
remember that she spoke very fondly of you.
Um,
So I
Amanda's
know
the
that
best.
that fits in there somewhere.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, Amanda's the best. She's the probably she was chief legal officer when you spoke to her.
Yeah.
She's now taken over the reins at the DeFi Education Fund. So I was actually at Compound when the DeFi Education Fund was initially funded by a Uniswap governance grant. And because of what I've described, being sort of a loud voice on policy issues, Uniswap governance put me on the steering committee along with a bunch of other amazing lawyers and policy minds. And I'm still on the board of directors for the DeFi Education Fund. I think one of, if not the most effective policy organizations in DC. And I do most of my work through DEF now on policy. And with Amanda, also a lawyer at Cobra and Kim before she came full time in
Oh,
crypto. So yeah, similar stories there. But my time at BA, it was really amazing in its own way, getting to know the entire industry and very different from when I was at Compound, where I went very deep down the DeFi rabbit hole and really became a DeFi lawyer. At BA, I had to understand and meet people from the entire crypto industry, Bitcoin miners, centralized exchanges, custodians, trading firms, venture capital firms, right? Everything in the entire industry. We grew the membership from, I want to say it was maybe 40 or 50 when I joined to just over 100 by the time I left.
wow.
Also, while I was there, FTX blew up, and I got to have a front row seat to all the fallout from
You know
Sam
the
Bankman-Fried.
policy mess there.
Yeah, and like truly, it was one of those moments where we felt like this might be the end of crypto in the U.S. And at any moment, Congress could decide this is bad enough that we're just going to ban crypto. And so, I spent the second year that I was at BA basically managing the fallout of FTX and doing my best to help everyone understand
Like
this was an
damage control,
issue.
basically.
Yeah, right. And it's like, this is just one bad guy. This is not a bad technology. This is a person who needs to be prosecuted. But the industry itself is not characterized by this. And after those couple years, I was feeling a bit frustrated in part because of the stalemate, the gridlock in Washington, right? we had a divided Congress. We had Democrats who were very anti-crypto. We had a president and administration that was very anti-crypto. It felt like all I could really do, again, was play defense, not unlike when I was outside counsel responding to SEC subpoenas on behalf of companies that had done ICOs. And I felt once again like I want to get back in the seat where I can help people build things the right way. And during this time, I had been an advisor to Variant, which I had started working with a general partner, Jesse Walden, back when I was at Compound, way back in the day, talking to him about ideas of decentralization and design for tokens and decentralized protocols. And similarly, he came to me as an advisor and he said, "We're getting to the point where we feel like we need to hire an in-house lawyer. Do you know anyone?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do know someone." And,
As it
again,
happens.
yeah. And so, one thing just led to another. And I've always been such a huge fan of Jesse's and felt like VC was the best place for me, given all these experiences I've had, to have the most impact on the widest range of interesting projects, where I do get to work directly with founders and with engineers to help them figure out from day one, what are we building and how do we do it in a compliant and commercially competitive kind of way. But also I get to work with lots of different people and stay on sort of the bleeding edge of what's going on in the industry. So I've been here at Variant since last January.
Wait, so I want to double click on the last thing you said just for a second. So you're chief legal officer at a crypto-centric VC. Does the majority of your work focus on protecting the interests of your client, the VC, or kind of strategically guiding your portfolio companies? And like, how is that split? And how do you kind of balance out the interests of, on one side, representing the fund and wanting to maximize their profits, and on the other hand, representing the companies and trying to help them to get as far as they can go in a compliant fashion?
It's an excellent question, and I'm very happy to be able to say I have to do both, and I have never found there to be a misalignment between what's good for the fund and what's good for the portfolio company. And I know there are maybe other venture firms that operate differently, but Variant, especially as an early stage fund, we tend to be the first check into a new company, pre-seed and seed rounds. We are very much aligned with what our founders want. We want to enable them to build the best product that they possibly can and help them to succeed. And we figure if they succeed, we're going to succeed. So, there's never been a case where it's like, this is what's good for Variant. Here's something that is, directly in conflict with a portfolio company. I will say the one issue, and this is a little in the weeds, but just a good example of what you're asking. An issue that we've come up against is whether we as a venture firm can participate in decentralized governance. And you may know, or listeners may know, that this has become a very difficult and risky issue because of litigation against DAOs, where the plaintiffs will say, in cases like the Lido case or the Compound case or the CFTC argued in UkiDAO, that anyone who has ever voted a token is a member of a general partnership, jointly and severally liable for everything that the partnership does, including operating a decentralized protocol. And I think it's very fair to say, not legal advice, but I think most venture firms are not comfortable taking that risk. So it's like my portfolio, the companies that have tokens that have on-chain voting would love for us to participate. It's just not something that we're able to do. And so there are some issues
Really?
there.
Well, so you guys don't
Yeah.
take any, you don't do any SAFT investments or anything, just equity?
Oh, so no, in terms of investment, totally
Like you
different.
wouldn't
And
hold tokens because of
I just
the
mean voting. I
of
just
the
mean voting.
so you would hold a governance token, but you wouldn't participate in governance.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard in the ordinary case where the DAO does not have any limited liability
I don't
for
think that extends only to those participating in governance. I think by virtue of holding the tokens, you're a DAO member, whether or not you're an active member or not.
So this is a very interesting question. There's no answer to that question under US law. And depending on what court you look at, you can get different answers. So I will say it does seem pretty clear that if you are just a holder and you take no other action at all, you will not be viewed as a general partner in a partnership. At least that was the conclusion that one judge came to in one case, the Compound
Yeah.
case, about one of the investors. But like where the line is between tweeting something about governance versus voting, like at what point you become a general partner in the partnership, really unclear. But look, the reason I'm giving this example is to say I do, of course, look out for the fund's legal and regulatory risk and also our policy interests. However, the vast majority of my time on a day to day basis, I spend with founders in the portfolio or with prospective founders who are pitching us or who we want to work with, talking to them about the substance of what they are building. And that to me is really like where the magic happens. And I think a pretty unique opportunity in VC where, the biggest conflicts between the fund and the portfolio are these little things like, as an SEC regulated RIA, are we able to take certain actions that we would love to take, or are we barred by it, as opposed to, some bigger conflict than that? So just sort of a different way of having that relationship.
Absolutely. So you've worn all the hats at this point. Like you've been in-house, you've been big law, you're in VC, company side, like you've seen it all. All you need now is to be GC for a DAO.
So I guess so. I haven't worked in government other than my clerkship, which I would not really count exactly as
You're not
working in
missing anything.
government. But I don't know that that one is going to be in my future. So I'll just have to see.
So now that we've covered you, Jake, and I know that you said that this is a breath of fresh air from like opining on US regulation. It's been like a pretty insane week for the US on crypto law, passing the Genius Act and Clarity. I would love to get your thoughts on like how this is going to change things. First of all, I'd love to get your thoughts on like stablecoins generally, and stablecoin regulation, and then more specifically the recent bills that were passed in the United States.
Sure. So I'll start with stablecoins. I think stablecoins are extraordinarily important and will unlock an extraordinary amount of innovation and activity in crypto. To me, stablecoins are kind of like a gateway drug for crypto, right? The problem using crypto always as a medium of exchange was no one wanted to deal with volatility. Stablecoins solve that problem. Stablecoins are also just an obvious benefit, an obvious advancement for fiat currency. Like a US dollar is better on a public blockchain than it is in the traditional financial system. Period. End of story. Right? Settles faster, transacts more quickly, borderless, interoperable, composable, like all of these benefits are, I think,
Mhm.
undeniable. So I think very quickly we're going to see a very significant adoption of stablecoins by traditional financial institutions that are otherwise not very interested in the crypto space, but they see this payments in stablecoins as one very obvious use case. I think that that's the immediate impact of the legislation, that all these companies that see it as a great use case, but were afraid to get involved because of regulatory uncertainty, are suddenly going to start launching stablecoin products or transitioning to using stablecoin products. I think the second order effects of this are frankly the more interesting and exciting, even if they're a little bit further down the road, which is once you have many times more in total volume on chain in value. What other use cases do we start to see unlocked? To me, this is a great opportunity for DeFi, right? Once you have all these dollars or other fiat currencies on chain, well, they should be earning yield in some way. This is a great opportunity for a company like Morpho, a portfolio company of Variant, of sort of new DeFi lending protocol that's, I think, taking over the DeFi space by storm, right? Same thing for transactions in digital assets. Now that you've got all this value on chain, why are you using a centralized exchange instead of using Uniswap or some other AMM? So I think that the next question is once many more people have wallets and many more dollars and other currencies are on chain, what happens after that? And I think it's somewhat unforeseeable, but really exciting.
Okay, let me ask you a question, and I'm this is definitely like slightly exaggerated, but as a DeFi guy, there are many cases where funds are stolen or all kinds of other funny business. People reach out to Tether as the controlling entity of USDT and ask them to freeze the funds. No C's yet, just freeze. And typically that's something that they're able to comply with. Maybe you give them like a police report or whatever. Um, so what would you say to the allegation that the ability to freeze funds like USDT and USDC and other stable coins is basically just one step removed from being a CBDC.
Yeah. Um, so first of all, I would say centralized stablecoins are not themselves DeFi, right? Centralized stablecoins
It's a
depend on a
primary
trusted.
tool within DeFi.
Exactly. But the thing is, like, I think DeFi is asset agnostic, right? DeFi is the rails, and you can put whatever asset into DeFi you want to. But let's not confuse the stablecoin itself with being decentralized. There are decentralized stablecoins. That's a totally different thing. Whether it's one step away from a CBDC, though, I think is a totally different question. And I think it's a bit of a jump. Yes, this
I tend to agree.
and like I know this was a primary critique of the stablecoin bill, and I think that comes from a good place. People who don't like the dollar in the first place, right? They got into Bitcoin because they want to end the Fed and kill the dollar. They're not going to love stablecoins, but I don't think it's a CBDC any more than a bank deposit is a CBDC. It's subject to government regulation and authority, but the government isn't controlling it in the way that they would a CBDC.
Okay, well said. You wrapped that up nicely.
And then let me give you maybe a quick take on the other bills. We're working now on market structure legislation. That's the next big thing. The next thing we have to figure out is, what are these assets? Are they securities? Are they commodities? Are they something else? How, if at all, do they get regulated? How do we regulate the secondary markets where they trade? And so the House passed the Clarity Act. Really exciting. Ton of work went into the Clarity Act. We're now moving over to the Senate to see what the Senate wants to do. The Senate appears to have very different ideas about what market structure legislation should look like. So I think we're still pretty far from getting market structure legislation done. But I do think that's the sort of big challenge for the space. That's the next big thing that we have to get done. And after that, I mean, we've really solved a lot of the regulatory issues in crypto, and then it's just sort of filling in the details with rulemaking and commercial best practices. But we're, well on our way at that point to becoming a mature, sophisticated,
crazy how fast that moves.
boring, industry.
we were miles away from that a year ago, and now you're like, yeah, we're almost done. Just plugging a few rulemaking.
Yeah. And I guess what I'll leave you with, having gone through this whole story of my career trajectory, is that I do think someday crypto will be boring. It'll just be finance, right? But I think we're far away from that, far enough away that I'm still very excited and passionate about the work that we're doing. And we've got a long runway. But when that day comes, we can all breathe a sigh of relief, pat ourselves on the back, and then move on to whatever the next bleeding edge technology is that challenges the status quo.
Well, I'm not sure if I could say that I'm looking forward to that point yet, but I wish that I hope that we get there.
Definitely.
Jake, thank you so much for joining me today. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, want to read your great crypto Twitter alpha, are you still posting on crypto Twitter?
I am, yes. So that's still the best way to get me on X, I guess we call it now, at Jake Chervinsky. And follow me there.
Okay, fantastic. Jake, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to talk.
Likewise. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Code. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share with your friends, and to tune in again next week for more fun and insightful conversation.